Welcome back, folks. We're looking at the operations that we perform on one-dimensional numbers, and we're extending those to operating on two-dimensional numbers, or complex numbers. Okay, you might think of them as imaginary numbers, but imaginary numbers are just part of it. We looked at addition in the last video. We want to get to subtraction, but if we want to get to subtraction, we got to take a detour through negation. It's an operation we don't think of often as a separate operator. But it really is. It's a way to manipulate a number. And it's really the first step into subtraction. Okay? You negate one of them, and then you just do addition. So we got to do negation first. So let's look at that one. Okay? So negation. So if we have a positive 2, and we want to get a negative 2, all we do is go in the opposite direction, right? So in one dimension, here we are. We have positive 2 off to the right, and negative 2 is just off to the left, the same distance. So that's kind of at the heart of the matter for negation. Now, I want you to think of this in terms of polar, right? Polar numbers. We might think of these as 2 at an angle of 0, okay, because it's pointing right along the real axis there, so it's at 0 degrees. And this one over here, instead of negative 2, we might think of it as 2 at an angle of 180 degrees. Okay. So again, we've been doing stuff with complex numbers. You just didn't know you were doing it with complex numbers. So 2 at an angle of 0 and 2 at an angle of 180 are equivalent. Okay. So how do we negate? Let's see, we had our number before. We said, how do we get 5 at an angle of 36.86 degrees? And I'll stick that in parentheses. And how do we negate it? That's a big negative sign. There we go. How do we negate it? Okay. And it's the same kind of mentality. We're just going in the opposite direction. Okay, but it's no longer just saying plus or minus. We have to think of it as a rotation of 180 degrees. Okay, so rotate by 180 degrees, or pi radians if you want to think of it in radians. Okay, so if we want to do this graphically, excuse me, if we want to do this graphically, it might look like this. So we have 5 at an angle of 36.86. Okay, there's our 36.86. And we want to head out just in the opposite direction. So we move around 180 degrees. Okay, and we end up, and then we take 5 steps, and we end up at this point. Okay, and we can do that in a couple ways. We can say this is, we could correctly say that it's negative 5 at an angle of 36.86, right? So face this direction and then take 5 steps backwards, and you end up at that point. By convention, we try to keep the magnitudes positive and just alter the angle, okay? So this form is a little better in that we're taking this angle, 216.86 degrees, right? So we start here at 0 degrees, we turn to our left, and then we take 5 steps, and we're out to that same point. Okay. By convention, we also try to keep these angles between plus and minus 180. So I'd be a lot more comfortable. I gotta do this math here. 0.86. Okay. And I'm gonna subtract 360 so that I get an equivalent angle. I'd be a lot more comfortable with this form. 5 at an angle of negative 143. 0.1. We get a little rounding here. 0.14 degrees. Okay, and that one's going to be here. That's going to be that angle. That's going to be the preferred form. Now, they all get you to the same point in space, right? So we can correctly say that this point here is the negation of this point up here. Okay, so it's not really magic. I did say that we could do this in both rectangular and polar, that they were easy in both rectangular and polar. So here it is in polar, which is similar to negation, or similar to exponential form, right? So nothing new there. Now, if you're going to do this in rectangular form, you might recognize that point as being from our 3, 4, 5 triangle. So you might say, hey, this is really 4, come on, write for me, 4 plus J3, okay? And if I want to negate that, another really big negative sign. If I want to negate that, it's just as simple as distributing that negative sign and saying that's equal to -4 minus J3. Okay, now graphically, let's look at that. You can probably see it's close up there, right? It's going to look like this. So here's 4 plus J3. Instead of taking 4 steps this way, I'm going to take 4 steps this way. Okay, and instead of taking 3 steps up, I'm going to take 3 steps down, and I end up at the same point. Okay, it's just -4 minus J3. So in my opinion, for negation, do it in rectangular, do it in polar, do it in exponential. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, I want you to think of negation as just turning 180 degrees and moving the same distance. Okay? So these are the 2 parts. We need these 2 parts if we want to put them together and do subtraction. That's what we're doing in the next video. Stay tuned and good luck, folks.